Hi everyone, welcome to Amy Learns to Cook. On the show today, we're talking knives. Today we're going to talk all about knives. We're going to talk about the difference between a chef's knife and a Santoku. We're going to be talking about types of steel, and we're going to be talking about Rockwell ratings, and we're going to be talking about why you would buy one knife versus another knife. We have a ton of knives out here to look at, and we're going to have a lot of fun. So the kitchen is open, and let's talk knives. Okay, so behind the stand mixer and the food processor and all my other loves that I have in terms of kitchen gadgets and cookware, cutlery is one of those things that is really high on my list. And it always hasn't been that way. It seems like the more I learn to cook, the more I realize that one of the most important tools that you have in your kitchen is your knives. Yes, we need great cookware. Yes, we need great appliances and sources of heat. Yes, we need great everything else that you guys know that I love to play with from the pan room. Mixers, food processors, immersion blenders. The list goes on and on. But cutlery and your knives are one of the core things that you need to invest in when you're equipping your kitchen. And if you're like me, I had a lot of junky knives. I got knives from my local discount department store. I had knives that I had bought on the internet. I had absolutely no idea what I was buying or what I even needed them for because I really didn't cook. But the more I start to cook, the more I'm realizing that I need this knife for this task and this knife for this task, and what all these things that come with a knife, what everything means. Now, do I say that I'm an expert on knives? Absolutely, totally, and completely no. I am just learning like you guys. You guys might know more than me. If you see something that I say that you would like to add on, just leave it in the comments, because everything I do is a learning process. I'm not an expert. I'm learning to cook, right? And I'm learning about knives, and I'm slowly learning to love them. And I've come to develop my personal opinion or my personal style around what kind of knives that I like. And as a cook, you need to do that. Because one great thing about cooking is what you like may not be necessarily the same thing as what I like, but we can engage in the conversation and we can all come out with more knowledge about what these products are about, what the materials are about, and how we can use them. So this is sort of fun for me because we get to look at and talk about some of the things that I have learned about knives over the years, and how you can use this information along with all the information that's available to make your decision. So let's start talking about knives. So let's start this out by talking about the core knife in your kitchen. The core knife in your kitchen is your all-purpose knife. And there's different versions of that all-purpose knife depending on what style of knife that you buy. So what I have here is I have a tray full of classic Western style chef's knife. This is your all-purpose go-to knife. It's great for a basic cutting style that we're going to talk about. And this is a workhorse in a Western style kitchen. We also have a tray full of Santoku knives. And the Santoku knife is sort of the workhorse when you're talking about Japanese knives. Because when you're talking about knives, there are areas that are classic knife making areas. You have either Japanese, French, or German, which is known as the Western style. They all have different philosophies about shapes and steels, and most of that is driven by the style of cooking. So let's grab a couple of these. We are going to start with just classic Wusthof, which is one of my favorite lines of knives. So this is a Wusthof classic chef's knife. I love the classic series. It's actually one of my favorite knives. And we're going to complement that with the same line. This is the Wusthof Santoku. These knives are made in Germany, so this isn't like totally a traditional classic Santoku, but it's in the Santoku style. I just wanted to do this with one manufacturer so we can take a look at the differences between the two. So, chef's knife and Santoku. This conversation could go on for 15 hours between these two knives. Everybody's going to ask me, Amy, which one should I buy? My answer to that is, it depends, get both, right? As your collection grows, you're going to add knives, and you're going to want to add both of these knives. These are both basic standards. Personally, for me, I would start with the chef's knife. And we can talk about a lot of the differences between these. One of the things you could automatically see on these two knives is the shape. You see how the Santoku, and this is a classic for what I'm used to Santoku, as opposed to some of the knives that are out there that are kind of hybrid. Look at how the Santoku from the tip to the heel of the knife is straight. You see that? Look at the chef's knife. From the heel of the knife to the tip, you have a curve. The reason you have that is because these two knives are designed for two different cutting styles. A traditional Western style cutting technique is the rocking action. So you grip the knife here, and primarily you're going to focus on this area. So you're going to cut like this, like you cut an onion, but ultimately your cutting is this, right? And we've talked about this a million times. This rocking motion. That is a Western cutting style. And this knife is designed this way because of the traditional cutting style in the West. It's this rocking motion. This knife is made out of softer steel, and there's a reason for that, because this knife plows through bone. It plows through big, hard vegetables. That's because that is the cooking style in the West. The Santoku is designed for more of the cooking style in Japan. So in Japan, there's a lot of fish, there's a lot of vegetables, so the cutting technique is up and down. And it's this. And it's slicing fine shrimp and chicken this way as opposed to this. And because the cuisine tends to be more about fish, it tends to have a lot of sushi, you need a knife that is super, super sharp. So the mission of a Japanese knife is for the up and down cutting style with a knife that is incredibly sharp. The mission of a Western style knife is the rocking motion, as well as a knife that has heft to it, because it's bone cutting, beef cutting, chicken bone cutting, big vegetables, everything that's hard that could potentially damage a knife. So these two knives are made differently because of the style of cooking. One is not better than the other. There's not, oh, I like this or I like that. A lot of it has to do with your cooking style. It has to do with your preference on the way you chop. You really need to get attuned to that. So you might want to go and get a really cheap version of both of these and use them for a little while and find out what's your preferred cooking method. You really need to analyze that. That's not a question that anybody can answer for you. You really need to look, make a list of all the types of cooking and the dishes that you do, and look and see, when you grab a knife, how do you start cutting? Do you rock or do you do this? That whatever's most comfortable for you that's the kind of knife that I think you should start with. Me, I learned chopping with a rocking motion. That is the most natural for me. So my first option in terms of a knife is a chef knife. That's not because I think one is better than the other, it's just my style. So that is kind of the difference between a chef's knife and a Santoku knife. So because of those needs, the type of steel, how these knives are created and how they're sharpened is also all dictated by the style of cutting and the cooking style of the different philosophies of knife making. One of the things you have to look at is the type of steel that these knives are made out of and its hardness, because that really dictates how these knives work. So we have to examine what materials are we going to use to build the knife, and then what properties do we want that material to have. And when you're talking about a Western knife or a Japanese style knife, those things are completely different. So that still goes into my thinking of, I can't tell you what kind of knife to buy because it really comes down to how you cook. So what am I talking about when I'm saying this? Okay, the types of steel. We have ceramic, which is sort of, newly becoming popular. We have steel. Steel is broken down into two different areas. You either have a carbon steel knife or you have like a stainless steel super steel knife. The difference to two is a carbon steel knife, which is this, and a super steel knife, which is this. Both of these are Dalstrong Santoku. All these knives are high carbon steel. The problem with high carbon steel is over time it can pit, it can corrode, it gets a patina on it, and some people love that on their knife. They think that's what gives it character. But a lot of people don't want those properties. They want their knife to look nice and shiny like a nice new stainless steel tri-ply pot, right? So they want their steel to maintain that luster. So to get a high carbon steel to maintain that luster, you put things in it to improve its corrosion resistance. We do that with cookware. Cookware, you can buy a stainless steel piece of cookware, or you can buy a high carbon steel. And typically you see that in a wok. So if you've ever seen a high carbon wok, the more you cook in that wok, it starts getting pitted looking, it has a really significant patina on it, and sometimes that can lead to its non-stickability. Whereas a flat out piece of all-clad is nice and shiny, you use a little barkeeper's friend, it always stays shiny like that. It's really a matter of preference. So how they get that corrosion resistance in these hard carbon steel knives is they put things in it like chromium, vanadium, other elements, other minerals that improve the resistance, the corrosion resistance of the knife. So this is a high carbon steel knife. This is a super steel knife. This is a high carbon steel knife, but it has those additives in it to improve the corrosion resistance. But there's a downside of that, because when you start putting those things in there, you have a less percentage of high carbon steel and a higher percentage of those other things that they add in there. So those additives do have a downside, because what it's doing is it is making it harder. You can sharpen it more, but it also is more brittle. So it's not as strong of a steel as the high carbon steel. So if you want a strong pan, a strong knife, get a straight up high carbon steel knife, and you don't really have to worry about having those issues. But if you want the corrosion resistance and you want your knives to say nice and shiny and pretty, you need to look at a knife that has those additives, and that steel runs the gamut. This is VG10. It's one of the best super steels or stainless steels out there that you can use for knives. It's probably, near the top. But also, you do have that little bit of downside, but some people don't, they don't want the patina on the knife. So they'll live with that little bit of con to it, if you would say, to get those corrosive resistant properties. Okay, so now that we've thought about the types of steel, we know that we can buy a high carbon steel knife, or we can buy a super steel stainless steel knife. We need to talk about one of the fundamental issues between the German and the Japanese knife. So the next issue between the Santoku and the chef's knives has to do with its hardness. And the hardness will significantly affect the ability to sharpen the knife, how sharp you can get it, and how sharp it stays. So the difference between these two 100% goes back to the style of cooking. So there's a rating that goes along with steel that rates the hardness of the steel. So the harder the steel, the more sharp the knife can get. And when you are talking about a chef's versus a Santoku, because of the different cooking styles, the sharpness really is a huge issue. Because again, when you're talking about the Japanese or Santoku knives, you want a highly sharp knife that can just razor through fish, through to make sushi, razor through vegetables. They want their knives as sharp as possible. And to get them as sharp as possible, they want a steel that is high on the Rockwell scale. So when you're talking the Rockwell scale, you're talking a hardness rating of between 58 and 62 on the Rockwell scale. That's a sweet spot for getting knives really sharp, but also knives that just don't crumble in your hand. They are a lot more brittle, because as the steel gets harder, it can chip, it can crack, it can do all that kind of stuff. So that is a sweet spot when you're talking about Santoku knives. And we have the Dalstrong series here. We have the, that's the carbon steel. This is a super steel. The super steel is a 62 on the Rockwell hardness scale. So that is at the top of the sharp level on the Rockwell scale. The carbon steel knife is a 58 on the Rockwell scale. So it is at the lower end of the sharpness sweet spot. Then we have the Gladiator. It is a Santoku, but it's made out of German steel. It's kind of like a hybrid because it is 55 on the Rockwell scale. So this is a significantly softer knife than these. The difference is these are going to get razor sharp, but they're also, you can't abuse them. You can't run through a bunch of bone because you will chip them, you will break the knife. They are razor sharp. You have to sharpen them frequently, but the German steel, the style of it is durability. So the steel is softer. It's a 55 versus a 58, 62. And it's more durable. So you can power through bone. You can do all that stuff in sort of a German style knife. So the Japanese knives are driven by sharpness, but it sacrifices is the brittle and the chipping. The German knife is softer, but you aren't going to be able to sharpen it to a level that the Japanese knives can be sharpened. And you're going to have to sharpen it more frequently, and it's going to be harder to get sharpened than if it had harder steel. So, you know, when you're talking about cooking, you really need to take in consideration when you're making a decision between a chef and a Santoku. A lot of people like Santokus because, you know, Santokus about 10, 15 years ago ended up on a TV show on one of those cooking channels, you know, some by last name of Ray. And all of a sudden everybody had to have a Santoku, but they don't even know what the Santoku is. It's a highly sharp knife that needs to be used on more delicate foods, and you can chip them and they're more brittle because the steel is hard. A classic chef's knife can power through a lot more. It's a more durable knife, but it also cannot be taken as sharp as a Santoku knife. It's going to be harder to get it sharp, and a lot of them frankly have the bolster on them. So you can get more hybrids that don't have, or you can get bolsterless chef knives. I actually have one right here. If you're talking about, this is kind of a lower end knife. This is a Victorinox. This is highly rated. It has really good steel. This one is inexpensive. It's about a $40 knife. And this is an excellent knife. It won't stay as sharp as long. It won't get as sharp as a Santoku with the higher Rockwell rating, but this is what meat cutters do. When they get animals hanging from the hooks in the meat processing plant, they use this bad boy. They have to sharpen it frequently, but they use this bad boy because they can power through. They're either using this Victorinox or they're using a Dexter because this is a workhorse. But you might not always want that because you might want the sharpness of a Santoku. Okay, so we can look at some of the chef's knife that I have. Again, this is a Victorinox. It's about $40. One of the things about this is it's using really high quality steel. There's been a lot of tests on this knife. This is a workhorse in a commercial kitchen. It's cheap. You can give it to a bunch of cooks or untrained cooks, and they can beat these things up, and they're not hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So you don't have to worry if they mess it up that you're out a lot of money, right? This is a great knife. It's one of a certain magazine's pick, and it's a great knife. Here's some of the other knives that I have. I have this Calphalon knife. It's a fully forged chef's knife. One of the things about this knife, look at how big the bolster is. If you want to talk about the difference between these, I've got my Wusthof Santoku here. This thing is light. It's thin. You could get the skin off a fish. You can cut delicate fish, cut like a lot of delicate things. If you put this Calphalon chef knife, this right here, this is a classic example of the difference between these two knives. This is like an ox. It's heavy, it's long, it's really thick. Look at the difference in the thickness between these two knives. Look at the thickness here and the thickness here. This is a big, huge monster of a knife. It's great for a lot of things. But that's the difference. More delicate and beast, right? This is a Calphalon. Some of these are a little beat up because they've been well used and well loved. This is a Calphalon. This is a little shorter chef knife. It's a 6-inch chef. This is Henckels. It is the 4-star 2-line, and it's an 8-inch chef. This one is, I really like this. I've used it. I kind of like this because I feel like it keeps my hand like sort of on there. It's got a bolster and it's got this, keeps it from sliding around. This knife is really well used. And this is our Wusthof Classic. I mean, this is like a total go-to knife in the kitchen. I love it. And here's a bunch of Santoku knives. This one is our German steel Dalstrong. And just like before, if you look at the difference between the two, this, even though it's a Santoku, it's more like a hybrid because it's heavy like a chef's knife. And you can totally tell it's not as thin. And also the shape of it. Look at the shape of the Wusthof. Flat, right? This has got a little thing, so you could like quasi do rocking motion with this. So this is a Santoku, but it's kind of like a hybrid. This is another Dalstrong. This is a straight carbon steel knife, where this is super steel. This is super steel. Here's our Wusthof Classic. And now we're getting into my funny little cheap knife. This is a Core Kitchen. I only bought it because it's gold. And this is a cheap knife. It's good. I use it all the time. It'll give you decent performance. But I just thought this is my little novelty knife. And this is like really a classic, probably a stamped Japanese knife. It says it's made in Japan. It's stainless steel. This is a wasabi line, but this is not full tang. If you look at how the handle is attached and look it down on this end, this handle doesn't go all the way down through this handle. A lot of people feel like maybe they don't necessarily need that. If you want a really sharp, hard knife, you may not need it to go all the way through the handle to be a full tang. I've seen a lot of Japanese knives that just are stamped and they're not, but there's some that are $300-400. So the fact that it's stamped, you really have to look at the knife and not just the term stamped versus forged. Look at that, beautiful, huh? You see these here? That's a Granton edge. It's supposed to help because these are really wider knives and it's supposed to help with it sticking. Really, a true Granton edge is, this one's almost true. A true Granton edge, the reason it works is because those divots in there make the knife really thin and in those areas, and it reduces the resistance of the knife. Most modern Granton edges really don't help with anything because, frankly, these Grantons, these divots are supposed to be opposite each other. So this one on this side is supposed to be opposite this one on this side. And Wusthof really, I would say, they're not that great on that. But when they're like that on either side, it thins out the knife really thin in the area with the divots, and it's supposed to reduce the resistance. A true Granton edge knife that really has a proper Granton edge in it, it does work to some extent. I found out that it's just sort of a gimmick, right? The Dalstrong, I really like it because the Grantons are shaped a little differently and they're really in there. I would say on the Shogun Super Steel, they are opposite. I can really tell that these Grantons are opposite, which is going to thin that knife out along that area. I haven't used these knives yet. We'll see if that helps. I found with like the Wustofs, I don't think it really helps that much, but that's my personal opinion.
Also, look, on the Wusthof, it's closer to the cutting edge. On the Dalstrongs, they space it higher away from it. Maybe that's the sweet spot of slicing.
Yeah, so look at how close this is to the cutting edge, and look at here. So if you slice potatoes with it, the potatoes just get all stuck on the knife. I'm wondering if this helps just because it's higher up. I don't know. We'll see if that, if it does help. So I hope that gives you a little basics of the difference between a chef's knife and a Santoku knife, the difference between a Japanese style knife and a traditional Western style knife. There's a lot to learn about knives, and I am definitely not a knife expert. I have just learned a little bit in my cooking classes and over the years. Thought I would share with you the little bit that I do know. If you have anything additional to add, just leave it in the comments and we can talk about it. So these are our Santokus. These are our chef's knife. Really, the difference is your style of cooking, how sharp you want your knives, and your individual preference about how a knife feels. Some people, you know, will get a hold of one of these big, huge chef's knives and say, wow, this is like a big, you know, this thing is a bear because it's really heavy. But another person will take a look at this and say, wow, you know, let me go hack up a lamb with it. So it's all really your personal preferences. What I will do is I will leave links in the bottom, in the description, with all these knives. You can take a look at them. We can further this conversation. If you want to leave comments, I'll respond to you, and maybe we can do an additional video in the future where we talk about beyond your basic bread and butter knife, your Santoku and your chef's, what do we add next? Okay, we got a chef, we got a Santoku, we're happy with that. What's our next step and how we develop our collection? Otherwise, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Dalstrong for sending these knives. They're beautiful and I'm looking forward to using them. If you want to see an unboxing of the Dalstrong, there'll be a link in the description for that as well. So thanks for watching. If you like this video, leave a comment and give me a like, and visit my website at amylearnstocook.com. I'm also on Twitter and Pinterest at Amy Learns to Cook.